is to bring it back to these chess analogies that we've been hearing about for the past day or so. Oleksiy yesterday hinted at some point that Ukraine in this geopolitical game of chess was not a pawn, which I think is correct, but he said that it was a queen, and that made me a little uncomfortable because chess pieces, after all, don't have agency of their own. And I would venture to argue that Ukraine very much does have agency and has demonstrated that agency. And I would much rather think of Ukraine as a player in this chess game rather than a chess piece. And Ambassador Chalyi, on that note, I would like to ask you whether you would agree that, especially in its relations with the United States, Ukraine has been able to play its pieces extremely well, including under fairly extenuating circumstances in recent months and weeks. Obviously, you can reflect on that from the perspective of your own experience in Washington during the first Trump administration. Or alternatively, I would suggest to you as another sort of theme to pursue the possibility that there might be something that Ukraine should have done differently, especially in handling the current administration. So please educate us on where you stand on this particular question.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good morning. And you know, it's a question, very important question for this panel. I'm not sure that I can educate it. We have some distinguished speakers. I just wanted to bring your attention for the name, for the title of this panel, is Queen's Gambit. Queen's Gambit, if you know, it's a very old style of beginning. I remember this was Alohin and Capablanca in 1932. This played 32 rounds in match for this beginning. What's that mean? Very short. It's according to organizers doing this, but we introduce everything. I want to just shortly introduce you additional this Queen's Gambit, not the Netflix, but as a beginning in chess. So that's as whites give the pawn, and after that try immediately attacking the not queen, but king. And two ways how to respond that. The one way, traditionally, is a symmetrical response. It's not counterattack, it's just accepted approach by your opponent. And that's happened in Black Sea in 2022 when United States unfortunately accepted the Russian approach and not goes on traditional now response, that's counterattack. I mean the ships that's convoying in the Black Sea. You remember, you Ukrainians, my compatriots remember that's how we check carefully which NATO ship in the Black Sea. Unfortunately, before full-scale invasion, we lose this opportunity, and this was, from my point of view, it was a great mistake. Rear Admiral probably known better that and can respond on that, but it's just one of the demonstrations how the strategy of the United States of stopping full-scale invasion not fits our expectation and our Ukrainian strategy. But I also can criticize slightly our position because now it's not official. We also not expected the same, or not same, but so active position of Russia in Black Sea, attacking us by missiles, attacking us by the clouds of drones. And Odessa, you know, who's from Odessa knows this better than anybody else, how from the sea can be attacking if you do not have system on the land. That's why, if you ask me what we should do together, what we expect, what Ukraine can do, Admiral Neish Papa yesterday mentioned very important things that we control now the most part of the Black Sea. But I'm a diplomat, and we worked before war, after war. I would say we will not have the same situation after the war. Because after the war, the freedom of navigation will be implemented as normal life. And that's a problem. In that case, if you lose Peninsula, if you lose Crimea, if, I don't want even discuss that, officially United States recognize belonging of Crimea to our enemy, it will be another great mistake, because without land, without peninsula, you can control this eastern part of this sea. So we are, if it's a broader context, we still think, and I personally think, that without United States we can prevail in the future. We are thankful for United States position, because I can say that probably not all in this audience. I work with 3 presidents in the United States as ambassador. And I could say for all of the 3 presidents, it was not very easy to resolve some issues, discuss the scenarios, but in each of them support Ukraine. And President Trump, I'm even more optimistic, probably I'm most optimistic in this audience about President Trump, because I met him maybe 15 times. And I think it's our task, Ukrainians, how to make closer our strategy, American strategy, Ukrainian strategy, how to prevail in Black Sea in a broader region. And finally, I'm optimist. I'm optimist because this forum in Odessa. I'm an optimist that we can, and organizers doing well, great forum. And I'm optimist because we see in very difficult time in Ukraine, so many friends sitting here in this panel and sitting around you. So I'm optimist about bilateral relations. Everything will be good, but it would be good closer for our victim. And please send us, I mean, America and you also from United States, send us more weapons, sanctions, and low prices for oil for 6 months. It will be pretty good gifts.
So I see you sort of very carefully sidestepped my question, but I'm not letting you off the hook. Is there anything that you think Ukrainians should have done differently in recent weeks and months, in especially handling their relationship with the Trump administration?
Well, frankly, not very comfortable question for me, because I still work with this team and Democratic team. And in the first term of Mr. Trump, probably you remember my article on the Hill and Fox and CNN criticized candidate Trump for position on Crimea. In that time, candidate Trump mentioned that Crimea could belong to Russia because traditionally it's Russian-speaking region, and historically, you probably have had this 2 weeks ago, something like that. And, you know, I decided in that time as ambassador, it's not my position to criticize internal politics in the United States. First thing, it's important. Second, President of the United States is a very important post position, but that's not all American. We have many support, and we receive support from intelligence, especially from intelligence, from defense agencies, from State Department, from Congress, from governors. I've been told by 5 governors in the states that the United States is not a country, it's a federal states of the countries. And we can support you. Now I can open you. California is our counterpart, and National Guard of California support us a lot with military equipment. And when we break through with President Trump, by the way, this wall, this prohibit to receiving the little equipment, including javelins, including everything, after that, even governors propose me, we can work with you directly, because you know, it's Americans, but Texas, it's 7th economy in the world. California, the 5th economy in the world. By the way, Russians putting down Russia 3 positions down during this war. It's 11 or 12. So we understand, I understand as ambassador, this is a very big country, very complicated internal picture, but we have to work with everybody. With Republicans, with Democrats, with President Trump, not forget what President Biden did for us, and work, and mind-wise, now, work with lobby in the military is very important. Now Lockheed Martin opened the new plan in Germany with Rheinmetall. Why is not open in Ukraine? Second, I know Admiral Hewitt make many things in cybersecurity. It's a very important field to communicate because the big war now in cyber sphere continues. 15 countries involved in this World War III. And third is intelligence and military. For me as ambassador, it was much easier works with congressmen and congresswomen as a veterans. And I believe we will see in America some changes in your bureaucratic structure, and we will see these guys, men and women, in that position in the very few months. And finally, what we Ukrainians can do additionally, not be so emotional. Ukrainians every day hear every word of Mr. Trump. Believe me, if as ambassador to hear every word that Mr. Trump told me, probably sometimes I make some very emotional steps. But and so my advice also for those who now responsible for Ukrainian foreign policy, Mr. Zelensky, who is the lead foreign policy as president, not be so emotional. Be more prepared for meeting with Americans, with proposal constructive, not just waiting, expecting something. And finally, you know, when I find in CNN last week, title, now everything for Russia and Ukraine depends on relationship with Mr. Trump. The main subject of this war. No, I disagree completely, sorry, because main subject of this war, our military forces and forces of defense. If we have that, this is the main subject, and frankly, our opponent, our country that we defend from the aggressive position Russia. Our partners, firstly United States, firstly for me, but Europeans, not forget about Europe, about Germany, new position of Germany, it's a very important factor. And we need it now. We don't need your activity tomorrow or next year, now. Now this means we have opportunity this fall. That's the final stage. If you will not use it, Putin will go further. Putin will go to Europe. Please don't forget that, be realistic. So my advice, be realistic and see what you see before you.
Good, thank you. I got our answer.
Thank you.
Finally. Bill, Ambassador Taylor, I want to turn to you next because I think it strikes many of us outside of Ukraine when we look at Ukraine today that it's a country that has grown assertive, that is guided by a certain clarity of purpose. And I wonder whether you saw that clarity of purpose and that assertiveness when you first served here in 2006, 2009, or whether that's something that really has emerged on the back of Russian aggression as a response to Russian behavior in the region, as a sort of almost nation-forming kind of new political culture. Whatever your sort of reflections from that sort of historic perspective might be, I would welcome them.
Dalibor, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you, the team here. Absolutely. So I was, as you pointed out, I was lucky enough to serve here twice, 2006, 2009, and then in 2019, 2020. And the difference is incredible. I mean, and it's exactly along the lines that you just asked about. That is, and this is sometimes difficult to remember. Ambassador Chalyi, you will remember this well. When I was here the first time, 2006, 2009, the second largest political party in this democracy, in this country, was the Party of Regions, unabashedly, unembarrassedly pro-Russia. You know, no doubt. That's hard to remember, but that was true. That's not true today. The actions of the Russians invading first in 2014 and then again big time in 2022 have consolidated the Ukrainian people in a way that they've never been united before. And that's made Ukraine able to take agency, what you were talking about, Dalibor, earlier, to be the main player in this game. And they've asserted that. They've asserted that, and to their credit.
Admiral, I want to turn to you for a minute, if you don't mind, because it strikes me that there is a divide in America between those who would see a deeper partnership between the United States and Ukraine as a potential force multiplier for American power, versus those who would see it as a source of additional liabilities that would drag us into the Third World War and create all kinds of problems down the road. What arguments would you offer in support of the notion that Ukraine has much more than just the potential of being a net asset for America, especially when it comes to hard power, when it comes to defense industrial base, when it comes to intelligence, etc.
Well, thanks for having me. And I have spent considerable time in Ukraine, somewhat before the war, working on energy, and then, of course, after the war began, really focusing on almost everything that you've brought up. And I spend a lot of time helping Americans understand why Ukraine matters and why it matters so much more than just this conflict alone. And as time goes by, it becomes more and more difficult to keep the American people focused on why Ukraine matters. But I think we're starting to see a lot of momentum now. I mean, I've been very vocal that Europe needs Ukraine more than Ukraine needs Europe. And I think that there is a bilateral relationship between America and Ukraine that may define this strategic partnership that you're referring to. I am unabashed in saying that the values of Ukraine are the values that we want to actually bring back to America, particularly family values, Christian values, innovation, fighting for survival. I was so interested in the format of this conference, and thank you again for inviting me. The Great Chessboard is such an interesting way of thinking about it. But let me offer a counter notion to this. The U.S. is playing a different chessboard from Russia and Ukraine. And for those of you, and I went back and read Brzezinski's book of 1997, The Grand Chessboard. And he warned America to not take its eye off the Eurasian continent. And he talked about this new kind of anti-hegemonic coalition between China, Russia, perhaps even Iran. And this was in the 1990s. And he said that, but this time it will be led by China. And Russia will be the follower in this. And they won't be an ideological coalition. They'll be a coalition of grievances, a coalition of authoritarian governments that feel left behind or not considered important. And I think that's one of the challenges we have, is understanding, and I hate to say strategic empathy, but it is a strategic empathy of Putin and why he's doing what he's doing. So, and this may sound like hubris, but America is really the player of the chessboard. And we have to ensure that it plays the chessboard with Ukraine as a strategic asset on that board for America. And I think we're getting more and more of an understanding of that. And I'm very comfortable that we will find a peace ceasefire of some kind. Is it sustainable? That is the question. And I've written a lot about the economic miracle of Ukraine, whether it's minerals, whether it's people, whether it's geography. And I think that's the last thing I would mention is the Black Sea, you disregard geography at your own peril. And I think the Black Sea is going to become similar to the Persian Gulf or the Straits of Hormuz or the Suez Canal in terms of resources, particularly energy resources. And the last thing I will say, and I actually wrote an article 2 days before the invasion. I was in Warsaw at the time, and I said that energy sovereignty is the Westphalian principle of the 21st century, not borders. And I think we're seeing that play out with Putin. He's attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure. And in some ways, that is what we have to respond to. And once we do get to a peace, and I want to see the economic entanglement between America and Ukraine, because that's how you maintain America's commitment. It's not to fighting Putin, it's to what is the economic value of our two countries. And I think that's limitless, and I'm very excited about that aspect of our relationship.
Congressman, I want to turn to you last because I probably will ask the hardest question that has to do with American politics and the U.S.-Ukrainian relationship that I think you can shed particular light on. You served for 12 years representing Ohio's 6th district. It's a district in southern part of Ohio, which was in your era comfortably Republican. It turned blue in the Northeast. It swung for President Obama, and then it swung back for Trump. President Trump received 66% of the vote in your district in the most recent presidential election. So in some ways, it's a microcosm of American politics in general, and of the dramatic changes and realignments we've seen in terms of working class vote, etc. And one of the features of that realignment is this growing partisan divide on foreign policy issues. I'm just going to throw some numbers at you that come from a poll commissioned by researchers at Johns Hopkins University, which found that 90% of Democrats would agree that the United States needs to help Ukraine win the war against Russia and drive the Russian army out of their country. But only 40% of GOP voters agree with that statement, and only 36% of self-identified MAGA voters agree with that statement. Now, Ukraine still has, on this poll, support of 62% of Americans, but there is a marked partisan divide. And conversely, only 3% of Democrats agree that the United States needs to end its support to Ukraine, even if it means that Ukraine surrenders to Russia, whereas 45% of self-identified MAGA voters agree with that statement. So how did this divide come about, and what can we do to change it and really bridge the gap that exists between the understanding of kind of U.S. interest in Europe between different groups of Americans?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I think I can answer that in 2 minutes or less. But nevertheless, it's delighted to be with this panel and an important discussion. Let me just take an overall view of helping us visualize America as it is today, and let's do it historically. My observation of history, there's never been a nation in the history of the world that became the premier nation on earth, but what it didn't seek it. It knew what it had to do when it got there, whether it be the Greeks or the Romans or the Spanish or the British. And they knew that the British had to control Gibraltar and Suez and Singapore and all the rest. With the single exception of the United States of America following World War II, that had world leadership thrust upon it to a nation that never sought it, didn't seek it, and when it was attacked in 1941, had the 17th smallest army in the world, smaller than Romania, and yet had to accept this responsibility of world leadership, and quite frankly, I think has done it fairly well. In addition, I cannot find an example of where a nation has shed blood and treasure for the freedom of another and never asked anything in return. I served on the Veterans Affairs Committee dealing with the Korean veterans having World War II having passed. I've never heard a Korean veteran ever complain about the sacrifice that he made and bears in his body every day, because all he wanted was for them to be free. So this nation has sacrificed. Now what has happened is we are now to a third generation. No longer the World War II generation, no longer the children of the World War II, but now they're third generation. And when they are lectured by Europe, for example, that they should prevent Saddam Hussein from going into Kuwait, if there's chaos in Yugoslavia and in the Balkans, that America should come fix it. The list goes on and on. They're beginning to ask the question why. And that's important because it's values. And our values and our dedication and our affection for Ukraine is not necessarily geographic. It is spiritual and personal, dedicated to those causes. Now, politically, when the folks that you mentioned, MAGA, those were many of those folks, that district that you mentioned, those people were all solid Democrats for over 100 years. But they saw in Donald Trump someone who said, I want to focus on caring about you. And those people who have been Democrats all of their lives, Youngstown, places that began to vote because they wanted to see America strengthened. That comes to our final point. When Barack Obama is president and Putin goes into Crimea, no one complains. In fact, they give him the Nobel Peace Prize. When the Chinese build artificial islands and militarize them in the South China Sea, nobody complains. When Donald Trump comes in, he says, no more, stop that, on both instances. And yet, when he's removed and Mr. Biden comes in, and Biden says, well, if Putin chooses to go into Ukraine, it depends upon the degree of the incursion. And again, we see the consequences of that. Now, when it's election time and the president of Ukraine goes to the single most strategic location in America to campaign 20 days before the election, to campaign for Biden in Pennsylvania, Then when Mr. Putin comes in, or when Mr. Trump comes in, and Trump says, now I have troubles in Panama, I have troubles in the South China Sea, I have troubles in the Middle East, I have to resolve what's going on in Gaza and elsewhere, and now these folks in Ukraine who have said that I'm the bad one, he then has to strap up and say, what can I do to bring this to a halt? Let me just tell you this. We have examples of his first term in office where we saw how Putin reacted. At this moment, the two of them are flexing. My personal opinion politically is this: don't bet against Donald Trump. Mr. Putin is playing his cards, and he's going to find out who's going to win. I believe that we're going to see an era coming in this next decade, an era of renewed peace and prosperity. And the sacrifice that was made by Ukraine over these past 3 years can be an example to the rest of the world that that's what happens when weakness invites aggression. And I'm convinced that the affection and deep admiration that the American people hold for the Ukrainian people will prove to its independence and protection. The United States will be there, Donald Trump will be there, and together we will move into a better future.
I mean, I wonder, are there specific policies from this current Trump administration that give you this sense of encouragement and hope that we are indeed moving towards a more peaceful place? Because if anything, I mean, the world does seem to be, getting increasingly on fire. I mean, the Chinese seem emboldened. Putin is just, bombing Ukrainian cities indiscriminately. So you sort of are seeing green shoots of kind of renewal and hope. If you could sort of describe them for us, that would be helpful.
Is that a question for me? Yes, I wish that this could have been resolved in the first 100 days, but it's going to take a little bit more energy. And I think that what you're going to see, when he left, Iran was weakened. The last time I was with him, about 5 days before he left office, and he was moaning over that. I remember he closed his eyes and he said, "But I had him right here. I had him right." They were so weakened, and yet under the last 4 years, we've seen them strengthened. We've seen the relationship that the embargo that was put on them with China was not enforced. We see Europe purchasing over $300 billion in oil a year from Russia. We see this chaos. Now he has to come back and straighten those things out. And I believe that he is. And I think before this year is up, the world will be in a much better place, both Iran, both with China especially, and with Russia.
We'll hold you accountable to that prediction. Bill and Valerie, by the way, I would like to sort of bring you both back into this conversation, specifically on the sort of U.S.-Ukraine relationship. But feel free to react as well. But I mean, I wonder if in this world in which, as the Congressman described it, Americans, don't want to be, taken advantage of, if you will, by the wider world, whether we are sort of moving to an age of bilateral relations between the US and Ukraine that will be kind of more transactional in nature, that will revolve around things like the minerals deal or kind of real quid pro quos rather than shared commitments to values and so on and so forth. But feel free to respond to anything you've heard as well.
Dalibor, thank you. I just want to emphasize what the Congressman just said, and that is, contrary to many fears that President Trump is going to be played by President Putin, contrary to many fears that President Trump prioritizes relations with Russia over relations with Ukraine and Europe and other parts of the world, the Congressman is confident, and I am hopeful, that President Trump is going to assert U.S. influence for all the reasons that he said, even though there is this generational divide and difference. I agree, Congressman. But President Trump, it is still very possible, that President Trump could put sanctions and provide additional weapons, as the ambassador has talked about, to Ukraine in order to bring that peace, in order to get to that ceasefire, in order to get Putin to to recognize and understand that he can't win this one. He can't win this on the battlefield. He's not winning on the battlefield, let's be clear. I mean, on the battlefield, he is stalemated for 2 years. The only thing he can do, as you've pointed out, is bomb Odessa and bomb Kyiv and bomb Chernivtsi, and that doesn't hold territory. If President Trump can bring President Putin to the table by imposing sanctions, acting, not just saying that he's concerned, not just saying that he's irritated and frustrated with Putin, but actually taking the steps to tell President Putin, you're not going to win this. And we're going to put sanctions on, we're going to provide weapons to the Ukrainians until they prevail. That can bring the peace that the Congressman is talking about.
I agree with that. It's a very optimistic approach, and Ambassador Taylor every time encourages us, Ukrainians. But frankly, I'm less optimistic. That's more probably realist. I think the day after tomorrow, this planned negotiation, it's another attempt by Russians to not to make the real deal as Mr. Trump wants. No. I worked with Russians for a long time in the 90s, and probably another side I met with Mr. Putin also, not in delegation and negotiation. And I could say that please don't trust them. Unfortunately, we will not have sustainable peace. The most important thing is this gift by President Putin to President Trump of 30 days of ceasefire. And even in that case, Russians sent such a list of Russian waiting expectations in memorandum. By the way, officially, we didn't yet yesterday didn't receive this memorandum by Russians. But in some speculation on some outlets, media outlets, you can find, for example, defend Russian speakers. I want to ask you, in this audience, many of you, I think, not many, but part of you Russian speakers, do you want Putin to defend you? Is anybody here? That's no. Forum answer no. In Odessa, Russian speaker city in Ukraine. I would say not Russian. It's Odessa's language, not Russian. Yes, Ukrainians know that. So there's another attempt how to make the imitation, I would say, or simulacre of negotiations. And Ukraine can also participate in that, because we need to participate. We must participate, not give any chance to Mr. Putin to condemn us that we do not want, and President Zelensky don't want peace. No, that's not true. That's why my prediction, it will fail once again. Mr. Trump makes step back from the position of mediator, but it doesn't mean he will be step back very long distance. When Putin will decide under pressure, as your optimistic scenario, come to the table, Mr. Trump will come. And he will be mediator for applause. And he will be mediator for Nobel Prize. And okay, I will vote for Nobel Prize from anybody who will stop this war. And that's why what we should understand, we Ukrainians should understand now. Unfortunately, this next week will be not a time of peace. It will be time of the next bombs, next attempts of attacking every city of Ukraine, terrorist Ukrainians, and try to grab more and more territories of Ukraine, including part on the border of city. I just returned, just back from the city region, very close to the Kursk border, 20 kilometers. We stand, our guys, and by the way, who is participating in security forum, including Georgia, including our brigades, they stand very strong there, very strong. We prepared much, much better than in 2022. But it doesn't mean this Putin will stop next week, no. We need to focus, concentrate all our efforts, sanctions, and I am optimistic on that. I think we will see sanctions from the Congress, not because Trump say, I decide about sanctions. No, I believe that Mr. Trump will give green live, yeah, thanks for that. And what's important, new weapons. I am very happy that finally the Pentagon not publish all the list of the suppliers of weapons, finally, and Germans not doing that. That's why I'm very optimistic. If we receive the 500, yeah, not if, when Ukraine receive Taurus, when Ukraine receive another type of 500 plus kilometers missiles for defense, how to stop Russia in that period, it would be very useful. Not change the war, but it would be very useful. And also coordinate sanctions policy with Europeans. But frankly, Europeans also, they wait in every time US position. And America decide, by the way, in the special resolution about 7 billion of the frozen money. Frozen US dollars, Russian US dollars, that's Russia. And now we receive some money from that. Why not Europe? 220 billions in Belgium, millions in Belgium. So they could decide many things. And the Europeans supply us packages, Danish, 2 packages, and ulteriorly packages. Now it's going pretty good, I would say. Putin expecting this when his military supply is finished from the previous package in the Congress. This will be a difficult time for Ukraine. August, September, October. Please give the Putin right message. Please give the Putin right message. And after that, before November, according to the specific also weather in Ukraine in that period, we will have this opportunity to open really negotiation. So your question's very right for this time, and probably to this scenario give the picture how we can achieve that.
Wonderful. Admiral, I think one of the most striking features of today's Ukraine is not just the resilience, but also kind of the internal dynamism and innovativeness and resourcefulness of Ukrainians as they are defending the country. And one concrete example has to do with this very fast innovation cycle in the drone industry. Served in the Pentagon for many years, which is not exactly the synonymous with dynamism and culture of rapid change. And I'm not a military expert myself, but I work alongside many at AEI, and I suspect there is a collective anxiety that we share about America's over-reliance on very expensive and fairly rigid military systems that might not serve us necessarily well if there is a sudden conflict with China. So are we perhaps approaching a point in the US-Ukraine relationship in which Ukraine would no longer be a net consumer of our military equipment and resources, but perhaps would be sending technical assistance missions to DoD to help us get a sort of slightly different and more innovative culture online that would allow us to actually fight 21st century wars?
One of the things and I did a lot of innovation for the DoD in my time in the Joint Chiefs, and I've gone back to the military departments and said, the innovation cycle in Ukraine is something you will never be able to replicate in America. They don't even have a government procurement process here in Ukraine. They're just fighting for survival. And what we've seen come forward is tremendous innovation in AI that has been repurposed for this war. There were maybe 5 drone companies in Ukraine before the war. Now there's over 200. And if you just look at what they've done in terms of range, endurance, autonomy, lethality, survivability, that innovation cycle is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And it's been done on the back of a conflict. And when you get rid of all the procurement processes and you're doing one thing, which is to defeat Russia, you see an amazing amount of innovation. I think what you're going to also see, and I'm cautious to say that this will not define all future wars, but it certainly is changing anti-missile defense. It's changing how we think about defending our homelands. We are learning from Russia because they're using Iranian, Chinese, and North Korean hardware. which is of great intelligence value to us. And one of the things that we're working on is how do we scale up the Ukrainian industrial base? And I think President Zelensky laid out a very smart plan for his defense industry. It's really three things. One is scale. And I give President Trump credit for waking up NATO in his first term. Because if you look at NATO's #1 existential threat in the first year of Trump's administration, it was climate change. And so at least he got them to say, you get to 2% GDP, or maybe I pull out. And I think that was an advantage we had. He moved troops, US troops, from Germany to Poland. So all the things that he did, I'm not saying he was foreshadowing the conflict, but at least he woke up NATO to its responsibility. And I think if he threatens to leave and he gets NATO to spend more money, he's getting what he wants out of that relationship. Scale is the #1 thing. 155 artillery shell factories, things that we took for granted for the last 10 years, we've depleted throughout Europe, not just with Ukraine and Germany, but even in the United States. We are out of slits when it comes to our military hardware. The second is Ukraine's unbelievable defense industrial base. Going back to Antonov and Pivdenmash and these companies that were like the Northrop Grumman and the Lockheed Martin equivalent in America. We need to rebuild that. And one of the great mistakes of Putin was he lost the intellectual property called Ukraine, both in science, rockets, missile systems, submarine commanders. You go right down the list. It was Russia that used Ukrainian experts to fight in the Cold War. And they've lost all that. And then the final piece is this innovation. We intend to help companies in Ukraine scale to the Western world while protecting their intellectual property. One of the biggest concerns I have is the big defense firms coming in and trying to bleed out this unbelievable innovation of these companies in Ukraine. So we must protect the young men and women, many of them that are here, with their ideas, the things they've developed to save their country, and help build that on their behalf. So I think Ukraine will become a military partner of ours. It is already a strategic partner of ours. And I see, they're so much more pragmatic than maybe we are. The last thing I will say, when I was in Kyiv last, they reminded me that you can't fix who your neighbors are. So you're going to live in this environment similar to Israel in the Middle East. However this war ends up, Putin is still going to be Putin, Russia is still going to be Russia, and the risk of conflict will not go away. So if we can take one lesson away from this is prepare for the next conflict, because you said it earlier, Putin will violate the agreement before he signs it. And we know that going in, and I think Trump knows that going in. So I would like to say give Trump a little bit of time and the tools he needs, and I do believe the optimism is there.
Thank you. As we are slowly wrapping up, I would like to invite everybody to share some very brief concluding thoughts. And I want to start with you, Congressman, because you obviously, despite no longer serving in the House of Representatives, still maintain very much a presence in Washington, very much a mover and shaker in conservative circles. So I wonder what made it so important for you to actually come here for this conference, and what sort of impressions and lessons will you be sort of bringing back home and sharing perhaps with your former voters in Ohio 6th District?
Well, thank you. I see we have 3 minutes, so I'll try to only take one and simply say how much honored I am to be with my colleagues here who have said I am in complete agreement with everything that they've said. And having spoken so strongly, let me leave a final point politically that I would like for our friends in Ukraine to understand. There's a great affection between us. With me personally, I was asked by President Reagan some years ago to represent him at the 1000th anniversary of Christianity in Ukraine. And the bond that we have is so significant that we won't let it fail. However, I would encourage you to focus as much frustration that you have with our current president with those who allowed us to get into this problem in the first place. And thereby, I would ask that you lock arms with us such that together we resolve it so that we don't have to go through this again.
the one thing that I think we have to focus on in a very important way is the long-term effects of this conflict on the Ukrainian and the Russian people, the young men and women that are dying in the battlefield. President Trump takes that very seriously. He is very emotional about the loss of life, and that's why you see him react the way he does. We're still taking care of our veterans in America from the fight after 9/11. The challenges in Ukraine will be 100-fold to what America's had to deal with. And so a lot of the work that we must do is thinking about the families, the veterans, and building out the institutions and the things we've learned in America to take care of our young men and women in Ukraine that will need a lifelong care. So that will be our focus going forward.
Such an important point. Thank you. Bill.
So we do need a goal, and the goal needs to be a sovereign, democratic, secure Ukraine, and that can unite Europe and the United States to be able to get with Ukrainians to get there. And we haven't talked yet about much about the European role in security, that one piece that I mentioned, and that is Europeans are stepping up for the reasons that the Congressman talked about, and that the Admiral talked about. That is, the Europeans are stepping up and may even be willing, we'll see, to put troops in Ukraine to enforce a ceasefire, to ensure that the Russians don't come back, that the Russians are deterred from coming back. But that goal, and the Ukrainians will fight for that, and they will continue to fight for that.
Okay, very short, but three messages. The first, two countries, when I next visit to the United States, I will bring the news from Odessa for this well-organized forum and invite them to organize this for Endspiel next year. That's the first thing. The second, I mentioned this, for my expectation, it will be very good and warm in America than two nations in the world who has now most veteran families. That's United States and Ukraine. That's a complete different situation. We are very close. We are close by our situation. We are countries who have brave people. We are heroes. We can to combine our force to save this world. And third, and third message is our message, and it's internal in this forum. I think organizers to choose a very good moderator for our panel. Please applaud him. He's doing well, listen us, and thank you for that.
Valerii, thank you. Gentlemen, thank you all so much for joining me on the stage today. Thank you for joining us as well. I hope you found this panel at least as magnetic as Anya Taylor-Joy's performance in the Queen's Gambit. Thank you.
Thanks to all of our